The best bits of Joy Drive with Em and Warren. No matter where you are, you can always take Em and Warren with you.
Theatre, film, TV and more. Suzy Wrong reviews it all on Joy Drive with Em and Warren.
Good afternoon, Suzy Wrong.
Good afternoon. You know, for those of us who are still renting our places, every few months you get the rental agent come and do an inspection. Well, I just had that happen. And you know, sometimes you forget that having a riding crop hanging next to your bed seems so innocuous to yourself.
A riding crop?
A riding crop, like you're on a horse, a riding crop.
Oh.
What's this for? I don't know this.
It's for when some boys need a bit of whipping into shape sometimes.
Right. We love it.
I thought you meant writing too.
So did I. I was like, a crop of writing.
I suppose you don't see pens and paper lying around that much anymore, do you?
That's right. So I found a hook several months ago and I thought, oh, this is really handy to just hang it next to the bed. It's really convenient.
Oh, I thought you were going to hang the boys on it.
No, no.
While they're waiting with their legs sort of kicking, going, me.
Well, give me some time.
You're next.
Anyway, it was a bit embarrassing to think, you know, like, I don't think he noticed it, but because these days they walk around recording a video around your apartment.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm assuming they're going to be sending it off to whoever, well, the landlord. And then, well,
They'll
it'll
just
be
think you're
interesting.
into horses or something.
Into horses in the bedroom.
Suzy, happy inspection day. What can we say?
I love it.
Now, Suzy, you set us some homework this week, which was Interview with a Vampire.
Yeah, they call it Anne Rice's Interview with a Vampire, but significant changes have been made to the narrative. In this new series streaming on AMC Plus, Louis is now black. And when he met Lestat in New Orleans, it was already in the 1910s, decades after the Civil War. It is true that these days, to tell historical stories, our framing needs to be inclusive, especially when dealing with things that have repercussions on racial matters today. But not only are these changes inevitable in today's climate, they actually make Interview with a Vampire so much more pertinent and fascinating. We are only at episode 3. The series is dropping weekly, and it is clear that the story is getting very rich indeed. Additionally, compared with the 1994 film starring Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt, this new version has queerness much more in the foreground. They also show us the complexities involved in negotiating a non-monogamous relationship. That is how much they have modernized Anne Rice's half-century-old novel. The original themes are all still there. It continues to make us think about mortality, about survival, about the choices we make for life to be bearable. What it conveys about life as outsiders continues to be powerful and resonant for those of us who have known ostracism. There are elements of gore and horror in this new Interview with the Vampire, but it is mostly romantic, sensual, and lush. The cinematography and design are so beautiful. Vampires are best served sexy, and both actors, Jacob Anderson and Sam Reed, are certainly turning up the heat. And I hope it wasn't too scary for you.
I only jumped, I think, once because I was not prepared for, you know, the quickness of the attack, but it wasn't actually too scary. So, Suzy, you know, I really kind of came at you last week because I thought, oh no, not again. Yeah. But it was okay.
I think they are very brief. They're enough to make you feel like you're in a vampire story. Then it happens very rarely, I feel like, maybe twice per episode or even that.
Yeah.
And it could get a bit gory, but it's like, you know, half a minute. So most of it is not about that sort of stuff. I think it does deal with a lot of really interesting things.
You know what I loved? I mean, it's very sexy. It's very passionate. And I'm going to be honest, I want to be bitten by a vampire after watching it. That was, honestly, I thought it was so erotic the whole way they've done it.
Well, it was definitely.
It really was.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, even in the first episode, you know, when you see the first biting, I mean, what a passionate encounter that is.
Yeah, I mean, the ones where they don't die.
Yeah, I know. I don't want to die.
A little nibble. Warren wants a little nibble.
I was thinking, wow, this is amazing. Anyway, I did like, and I loved seeing LGBTIQ plus, you know, inclusion in a vampire show.
Yeah.
I thought it was fantastic.
Yeah, there was a lot more this time, and I think there was a lot more intention this time to deal with it properly. Because I think in the original there was all this sort of uncomfortable implication that Lestat turned a straight man gay, you know, when he turned Louis into a vampire. But this time there was this sort of a storyline they added about him already having Louis having secret sexual relationships in the past that he was really ashamed about, and this was sort of an opportunity for him to learn to accept himself. I guess that there are all these little bits they've added to make it more modern, which I think which surprised me, and it's made it better for me.
But it's veered from the original books, though, now. That's the only thing. And I'm wondering whether they should have called it something different, because it doesn't really represent what the original, you know, Anne Rice's books were like.
I think they're trying to keep the main ideas and main themes, but there are a lot of changes. Like even the interview, Daniel Molloy, you know, we pick up from, Louis asking him in for a second interview because the original interview that happened in the 70s was not up to scratch or something. So the idea that Daniel Molloy is a much older man, but Louis looks exactly the same, and they're catching up, you know, decades after, which sort of was a good start to the series. You thought, oh, right, I'm not trying to revisit, you know, what I saw in the 90s or what I read before that, and we're taking it from, like, they even talk about COVID in the opening of it. But the strange thing was Louis was telling all the background story to Daniel again, which was a bit confusing. It was like, are they meeting for the first time or no? But, you know, because you'd think that Daniel already knew all the background story, but he had to go through all that again. So in that way, I think the writing was a little bit awkward, but I think that's just a minor technicality.
We're chatting about Anne Rice's interview with Vampire, which is currently streaming on AMC Plus with Suzy Wrong. Suzy, I really enjoyed that this iteration of this story was inclusive in terms of race and also LGBTQIA plus characters, but it also addressed racism, because there's been some programs recently that, you know, are inclusive because we need to be inclusive, because that's society and that's, you know, the world, and it's wonderful, but it kind of just like puts people in places that wouldn't maybe necessarily have actually been the case. What I like is they've put, you know, racial diversity into a society where obviously it was riddled with racism, and we feel that and we learn about that. So we're seeing like actually as it would have been in that time.
Yeah, they make the Louis character so much richer, I think.
Yeah.
Because he has this sort of narrative of comeuppance, doesn't he? Because we see moments of him being sort of abused by white people at the time, you know. So we are talking about a story that happened over a century ago. So black people at that time, were having a really, really hard time. And we do see that. And then, because he's become a vampire, he has the opportunity to sort of have some revenge stories happening, and how those revenge stories are maybe a little bit more complex than you'd expect. That's good. And at the end of episode 3, which is where we are at the moment, there is sort of this evocation of what actually did happen in American history, where white people set fire to locations where there were black businesses thriving, just sort of black people taking care of black people with their own businesses and making their own living outside of white communities, and white people sort of coming in to destroy those communities. So I thought being able to bring that into this old Anne Rice story was really clever, and it just felt like it really fit, didn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I felt the exact same way. And when you look at the way that they've, you know, really cleverly intertwined history into the telling of this story, if you put that in contrast to something like Bridgerton, where it just kind of like, you know, it really isn't accurately depicting the way in which society treated people. And I think, you know, in order for us to get better and be better, we need to see when it was really, really terrible.
We need to learn from history. And
exactly.
Also, Louis is no longer a plantation owner in this series, which is interesting as well. But you know what I love about it is you see, you know, particularly in the main character's confidence there, but you also see a bit of vulnerability as well. And I thought that was really well done and well acted by both of them. I've got to admit though, like, you know, I loved True Blood. That was my favourite vampire series of all time. This is not a True Blood. It's not of that level as far as I'm concerned, but very passionate. Much
I think
more
it's
passionate.
It's early days. Yeah. I mean, hopefully they get another series because they do have to set up sort of all the context of what's happening. I feel like the writing's quite intelligent, so I do believe that they could go to really interesting places. But, just like True Blood, with a lot of vampire stories, it's about vulnerability, isn't it? And it also I love that vampires tell this story about like, what if you don't die? Do you live differently if you know that you're never going to die? How does that make your choices different from day to day? Do you sort of seize the day more, or do you just kind of let everything go? And what does that mean? And I guess, and then that opens the door to looking at vulnerability. What are the things that you really worry about life because I guess they can't just sort of put things at the back of their mind as much as we do. That's the
No.
way I see it.
Yeah, I'll have to ask my friend the vampire. Suzy, I wanted to ask you though, we've got so many different streaming platforms now, and this is on AMC Plus. I have to admit, I'd never heard of AMC Plus until we started watching this. So is this a new addition to the mix?
I think in Australia they're starting to market it a lot with a couple of new shows, including Interview with the Vampire. I believe AMC is a cinema chain in America. So I think that's how they're trying to deal with the changing landscape of content creation. It's tricky, like, obviously for consumers, we have never had this before where we have to pay so many people for different things, like we're used to having lots of channels, but we're being put in a position where we have to pay each and every one. It is a new, different way of consumption, and it's tricky. Lots of people are starting to scale back. They're finding that, I'm paying for things that I don't use enough of.
And the prices have gone up too.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm looking at AMC Plus, and, I thought I was just going to be in for a week and watch the 3 episodes and cancel it. But I like this so much. I'm thinking I would at least stay until the end. I think of 7 episodes and then probably cancel after that. So they'll get at least one lot of payment from me.
Well, that's the thing I was going to say, Suzy. If nothing from this, chat we've had this afternoon, I definitely want to watch the rest of this season because I want to see what happens. I want to see how they keep unraveling a new iteration of this story, which is cool because, things get remade all the time these days. So
I was surprised. I
Yeah.
didn't think that I was gonna stay till the end, given it's a weekly drop. But by episode 3, I was really sucked into the story, and
yeah.
And I think the performances are really good because, last time it was Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt, and it was a young Brad Pitt, and both of them, and Tom Cruise is not the greatest actor in the world, newsflash. So this time, this time to be able to see, this Australian actor, Sam Reid, plays this amazing version of Lestat, not just really appealing, but just really complex and really challenging and really vulnerable. And they've written Louis in such a rich way. I feel really invested in the story.
Yeah.
So the series is Interview with a Vampire on AMC Plus. Suzy, just getting back to, what did you call it? A riding thing?
Riding crop.
Full circle.
So when you use it, do you float like the 2 vampires did?
You do feel a bit like that because you do feel very powerful, don't you?
There you go.
I love it. What's our homework for next week?
Go buy a riding crop. That's your homework. All right.
We're going to look out for the YouTube videos of your rental video.
Scary October continues next week with the documentary Queer for Fear, The History of Queer Horror, streaming on Shudder, which I believe is part of AMC Plus. I always love talking docos with you, so next week should be great. This is Queer for Fear.
Queer for Fear, streaming on Shudder, which is part of AMC Plus.
Yes.
Fantastic, Suzy.
Thank you, and I'll see you next Tuesday.
We'll see you floating next Tuesday.
Bye.
That's Suzy Wrong, our TV, film and theatre reviewer here on Joy Drive. More Suzy every Tuesday.
Joy Drive on Joy 94.9 FM in Melbourne, Joy on your digital radio, iHeartRadio, TuneIn.com or the Joy app. No matter where you are, you can always take Em and Warren with you.